Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We're about to get started with our next panel. And just a reminder, if you guys want books from the author, please go to the bookstore and buy your book before you get on the line. So next up is Embracing Desire, a debut author's journey. And I'd like to welcome our moderator, Jacqueline Woodson of Brown Girl Dreaming Red and the Bone, a novel, Another Brooklyn.
Oh man, this is so un-Black of us. We are starting 5 minutes early. I'm going to read real slow because I know how we do. So I'm really happy to be in conversation with my friend Mecca Jamila Sullivan. She is the author of The Poetics of Difference, Queer Feminist Forms in the African Diaspora, the short story collection Blue Talk and Love, which was published in 2015, and she's the winner of the Judith Markowitz Award for Fiction from Lambda Literary, and her novel, Big Girl, has been published and is it was the most anticipated pick by Vulture, Ms., Goodreads, Library Reads, and SheReads.com. Dr. Mecca holds a PhD in English Literature from the University of Pennsylvania, an MA in English and Creative Writing from Temple University, and a BA in African American Studies from Smith College. In her fiction, she explores the intellectual, emotional, and bodily lives of young Black women through voice, music, and hip-hop inflected magical, realist techniques. Her novel is beautiful. For those of you who have not yet read it, show of hands, how many people have not read Big Girl, and you won't get in trouble? Okay, that's good to know. I'm just thinking in terms of the questions I ask and what I want to give away about it. Her short stories have appeared in Best New Writing, Kenyon Review, American Fiction, Best New Stories by Emerging Writers, Perry Schooner, Callaloo, Crab Orchard Review, and the list goes on and on. She was a Pushcart Prize nominee, and I think all of this is important because we're going to talk about what it means to be a debut novelist, which Mecca is, and at the same time, she has a lot of writing under her belt. She's been a fellow at Breadloaf, at Yaddo, at the Writers Retreat that Lambda Literary does, publisher in Triangle, and the Center for Fiction in New York, where she received an inaugural Emerging Writers Fellowship, which is very hard to come by. And we're going to start with Mecca reading a little from Big Girl. Thank you.
Hello. Can you all hear me? Thank you, Jackie. I'm so excited about this conversation. I'm so excited to be here and to share some of Big Girl with you. It makes all the sense in the world that folks haven't had a chance to read it because it's not out yet. So you're totally excused if you haven't had a chance to read it. It comes out on July 12th. And so, yeah, I'm excited about that. In fact, I still haven't seen copies. Apparently there are copies here. Today will be my first time holding a copy in my hand, which is very exciting. Thank you. So I'm going to start by reading a little bit of the very first section of Big Girl. Big Girl is about Black women and girls, our bodies, our imaginations, and the paths we take across generations to make space for ourselves in the world. The novel follows Malaya Clondon, a big Black queer girl growing up in 1980s and 1990s Harlem, learning to write her own definitions of womanhood while her family navigates dynamics of class, gender, and gentrification. Set to a soundtrack of R&B, funk, soul, and especially hip-hop, the novel explores the pain, beauty, and power of life in a body that refuses to fit. So I'm going to read a few pages from the very first chapter, which is set in a fictional community center just a few blocks from here. The truth was, Malaya Clondon had been thinking of French fries since last night as she ate Chinese food in secret with her father while her mother worked late at the university. The thought of French fries stayed with the 8-year-old through the canned laughter and blonde-headed family tableaus of the Friday night sitcom lineup each week and helped her push herself from bed most Saturday mornings. She thought of the shiny fried strips nestled together, boasting countless shades of yellow and gold, from the time she cleared the front steps of the family's brownstone each Saturday until she felt at last the film of hot grease on her face after African dance class so much later in the day. On the walk to the meeting, other foods did drift to mind. Malaya and her mother, Naila, passed at least 8 bodegas on the walk, plus the McDonald's, the Kentucky Fried, and the Woolworths on Broadway, where the smell of hot popcorn seeped in slow waves from beneath the glass doors. On 145th Street, there was Copeland's Restaurant and Reliable Cafeteria, where they made crispy smothered chicken with gravy as thick as pudding and potato salad that was perfectly sweet and salty at once. But by the time the Klondon women pushed through the heavy green doors of the AME Mount Canaan Church and went down to the basement community center, by the time Malaya took her turn on the scale and watched red numbers blink and multiply beneath her, feeling her mother's eyes fixed on the number panel from behind, Malaya thought only of the potato and ketchup crunch-crusted mush she would have just before art class, how good and how full it would make her feel. She did not think of the hour of African dance she would have to get through beforehand, or what lies she would tell as to how her allowance had been spent. Well, don't everybody speak up at once now. Miss Adelaide, the meeting leader, laughed over the collar of her lavender suit. Malaya watched the woman walk to the front of the room full of fat women on folding chairs. Miss Adelaide caressed the plastic easel, flipping back a page marked Emotional Triggers pie chart, and exposing a sheet as clean and white as the face of a new tub of Cool Whip. She stood there, her hips sloped prettily out before her, her arms loose and easy along her waist. Come on, ladies, don't be shy. Miss Adelaide shifted into another breathtakingly casual pose, resting her weight on one tall, plum-colored high heel and letting a hand float up to stroke the paper. I want you to think about your favorite food. You know we all have that one food that always gets us in trouble. I want you to think about it. Call it out. Malaya listened, catching a few coughs, small squeakings of the metal seats. The rustling of a paper bag somewhere in the back of the room brought salt water to Malaya's mouth as she thought of removing French fries from their bag. She imagined the strips bending over one another in a red and white striped dish, a shower of salt crystals hitting them from all sides and sparkling like glitter. All right now, I know it can be embarrassing. Miss Adelaide leaned back, posed, then moved slowly toward Malaya and her mother, who sat a seat away to leave room for both their hips, Naila always said. Malaya thought nothing of the first steps, except how nice it was, the way the tapping of the woman's heels against the floor seemed to punctuate the soft rub of the shimmery pantyhose. Sht, sht. But within seconds, Malaya could smell the woman's perfume in her face and found herself staring directly at the silver buckle on her purple suede belt. Fear frothed up in Malaya's chest as the synthetic cherry stink of Miss Adelaide's uncapped marker prickled the insides of her nostrils. She would lie, she decided. She would disclose a passion for yogurt, welcome and unusual in a girl of 8. Her face puffed with earnestness, she would tell the woman that she was centered, committed, and in control, that she'd take fat-free frozen yogurt over cookie dough ice cream any day. She would make her mother proud and make this lean purple creature go back and check her scale. Those red numbers could not be right. This girl could not weigh 168 pounds, committed as she is. She parted her lips, prepared to declare her fidelity to the program. Miss Adelaide's lips were plump, and her red lipstick looked like jelly sliding over her lip line into her deep brown skin. She eased the empty chair from between the Klondon women's hips. Malaya closed her mouth. Well, everyone is so shy this morning. Miss Adelaide pushed to the chair to the center of the room and glided into it like a goose into a familiar pond. So I'll tell you all first. Mine was corn with butter. Anytime there was corn around, I knew I would not be able to control myself. I used to be a corn junkie. A few ladies along the wall chuckled. And I don't mean just a little pat, she continued. I'm talking about butter, okay? At this, Miss Adelaide changed shape before Malaya's eyes. She uncrossed her legs, hunched over, filled her cheeks with air, and made smacking noises as she ran her fingers back and forth in front of her mouth, mimicking a wet and unsightly battle with an ear of corn on the cob. The room roared. Fat ladies shifted massive thighs in their chairs. Thick ladies clapped their hands and crashed against each other like waves. And let me tell you something, Miss Adelaide said, leaning forward and pointing a finger at the group in a gesture of sister girl confidence. I know I'm not the only one. The whole room laughed, and one woman leaned her head back and opened her mouth so wide that Malaya thought she might freeze in that pose, turn to stone, and begin to spout water like a fish in a fountain. Then the meeting leader returned to herself just like that, left leg draped over right, shoulders straight, manicured hands with their red-tip nails resting coolly on her lap. "Well," another woman said from the fourth or fifth row, "I do have a weakness for pasta." "I heard that," someone shouted. "What kind?" And they were off, talking about food. Malaya didn't listen except when her mother murmured in testimony when the women mentioned foods that she herself liked, like oxtails and pistachio ice cream. Quietly in her mind, Malaya considered what this trigger food might be for her. But each food she thought of suddenly lost its appeal among these women who seemed to feel guilty for putting too much gravy on their grits. "My daughter and I like pie." Her mother's hand fell into her lap once the sentence was out. Malaya felt a force field of eyes on her. "I don't keep anything like that in the house, of course," she continued. "And when we go out, I try not to order dessert. But sometimes, on the weekends, I'll order an apple pie." Malaya anticipated the fancy syllables she knew would come next. "A la mode." "I try not to eat all the filling," her mother went on. "My favorite part is the crust. My daughter likes the filling, so if I do have a craving, rather than deprive myself, I always suggest we share." The room emitted a wave of supportive mm-hms. But children, they want their own. I don't usually let her order anything, but once we've eaten that pie, we're out of control. We're off program for the rest of the weekend, sometimes the whole week. Miss Adelaide added pie to the list, which had grown to cover the entire page, leaving only a tiny diagonal of space on the left-hand side between salmon cakes and plátano chips for the 3 letters of the Clondon women's apparent trigger. Malaya wished to liquefy and slide from her seat, find herself gone from the basement into that word, pie, curled into the lower nook of the E, as though it were a shaded ground below an apple tree. She wished for spots of sun to heat her sandaled feet as the leaves of her E-tree rustled, and for the cool of an afternoon to raise goosebumps along her legs. In truth, Malaya was not so compelled by pie. She would eat the filling because it was there, and because it would be the only chance she'd have all week to indulge herself in plain view right beside her mother. What her mother did not know, what could not be written on Miss Adelaide's board for lack of space and limitations of language, was that Malaya would have preferred an endless plate of potatoes over pie without question. Mashed, salted, swaddled in gravy or butter or both, and served in a bottomless mixing bowl, that was how Malaya wanted to eat. And by now, at 8 years old, Malaya had noticed in herself a tendency to choose quantity over quality, pools and pools of potatoes over a shared slice of fancy pie. She had not yet learned words like abundance or profusion or glut. The only word she could find to describe her true trigger was more. Of all the women who had in the room, at least 30, only 2 seemed to share her passion. The loud woman who had broken the silence what now seemed like ages ago, and a smaller woman in the corner who raised a hand only inches above her shoulder and said, almost in a whisper, "I have trouble with plain white rice." Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mecca.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm excited about this.
I am so excited about this. And talking to you, we go back.
Yes.
And it's such a beautiful book. I didn't realize it wasn't out yet, so I am so glad it's almost here.
Yes.
And I think I'm going to start with asking you to tell us about the first time you saw yourself in literature. I feel like Malaya and her mom are such mirrors in so many ways for so many of us, seeing parts of ourselves on the pages. And I always talk about Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who talks about the importance of showing people mirrors and windows in their literature. And I wondered where that began for you. Where was the first time you saw a part of Mecca in a book?
I love this question. So for me, it happened in the 5th grade. I was 11 years old. And up until that point, I always sort of gravitated to the arts and, especially visual arts. And I thought I was going to be this visual artist, and I was very clear on that from a young age. And in the 5th grade at 11 years old, I read Ntozake Shange's For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. I also read Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And both of those books, certainly not written for 11-year-olds, right? But both of those books really sort of illuminated for me that two things. First, that a Black girl's life could be something to write about, and that a Black woman could make her life writing those stories, right? And it was a revelation for me, totally blew my mind. And that was the moment when I realized that there would be this possibility for me, and that literature was a place to see my story, to tell my story, and to tell stories that are meaningful to folks like me who don't necessarily see that see themselves. Even in those two books, right? I saw so many, sort of examples of life experience that I related to, that I aspired to in some ways. Sort of thinking about colorism, thinking about what it is to be a kind of outsider in both the case of Shange and Morrison. And again, just the complexities of the lives of Black girls. And yet, it set me on a quest to see stories that reflected the specific concerns of my coming of age experience, particularly around shape and size and fatness and, sort of the refusal to acquiesce to standards of gender specifically around the body. And I didn't see those. And so that's what sort of made me think, okay, this is something I want to do with my life, and at least with this particular story.
Huh.
Yeah.
The books that came to mind, I remember Judy Blume's Blubber, which was highly problematic, which I didn't know, until I looked back on it. And I don't know if you remember Paula Danziger's Dinky Hawker Shoots Mac, which was a book about a big girl. But I feel like Big Girl is the first time I'm actually seeing a big character who, in all the ways she's existing in the world. And I love that you read the whole French fry thing, because I was like, yeah, I get it with the fries.
Right? They're good.
But she's also on the outside in that she goes to prep school. And can you talk a little bit about why you decided to take your character out of her neighborhood in that way?
Absolutely. I mean, and I think in some ways, this speaks to what I found in Shange and Morrison that I hadn't found in other depictions of big characters, and fat girls, that there's a complexity there in the lives of Black, queer, and feminist, and, sort of Black women's literary traditions. That sense of being the nerdy girl, being the weird girl, being the girl who comes from a different class background, right? That fatness is one aspect of Malaya's sort of outsider status, but she's a person. And my job as a writer, as I see it, is to create a full character that lives within a full matrix of structures of power and identity. And even though she doesn't have the language to sort of describe those things, in order to survive and in order to sort of be her full self in the world and have the full experience she wants to have in life, she has to find a way to navigate multiple structures at once. And that's something that I see happening in our literatures in a profound way. And I felt that I really wanted to contribute something, contribute a voice to this kind of, I think of it as a kind of pantheon that, is closely related to some of these existing stories, but hasn't quite been told, at least in a way that I needed to hear it yet. Audre Lorde says, she says, I started writing because I had a need inside me to create something that wasn't there. And that is absolutely true for me as well. It was a need, know?
Yeah. So it's so interesting. What is the first thing you remember writing?
That's a great question, Jackie. All these questions, I feel like I want to be like, what do you think? I guess I can say the first thing that I remember writing. The first thing that I remember writing was a short story I wrote also in the 5th grade, actually. Yeah, that, we were reading, I was reading a bunch of stuff that, again, wasn't written for young readers, right? And so I was really thinking through, sort of various forms of interiority and family relationships and family experiences. And I'd written a story that, and we had just read The Lottery by Shirley Jackson.
Oh my goodness.
Right? And so I was just thinking about sort of violence, honestly, and how violence impacts communities and impacts kids. And so I'd written a story that was kind of a violent story in a strange way. And the reason why I remember this was that my 5th grade teacher, Amy Cassell, shout out to Amy Cassell, definitely, profoundly changed my experience as a writer and as a kind of thinker. she found the story powerful and moving, and she, instead of giving it a grade, which of course I was really all about the grade, right? Like I needed this grade. I put my whole soul and heart into this story. Instead of giving me a grade, she asked me to talk to her about it. And she was like, and she basically was just trying to check in and be like, hey, is everything good? Are you okay? And it really let me know, okay, my imagination is powerful. And that was a profound experience for me, really sort of seeing that the things that I write can create an experience for the reader that can have a kind of effect in the world, right? And that it was extremely moving for me.
Were you scared she was going to tell your mama?
She did. She did. She totally did. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, actually, who's in the audience. Shout out to my parents, both back there. And I remember having a conversation with both of them, about basically just that, right? That your words are powerful. And it was a very encouraging and very loving conversation. It truly was a kind of, a welcoming or an induction into a relationship with my writing where I didn't think of it as trivial or superfluous. Audre Lorde again, right? This idea that poetry is not a luxury. I think we often think of creative expression as, superfluous, unnecessary, not capable of producing real effects in the world. Like it's just a pretty little thing. It's the icing on the cake, but it's not the meal. And that experience let me know that that's not true.
Wow, it's such a means of survival for so many of us, and a way of being able to make sense of the world. Absolutely. I think that the Big Girl does that in this wonderful way for Malaya. And Nailah, the mom, can you talk a little bit about her and the story? I just think she's such another wonderfully complicated character. And that scene where you read where she's speaking for herself and her daughter's like, no, not so much. Like, you're not speaking for me. But I found myself loving her and rooting for her and feeling choked up for her at moments. So how did you get to her? And what were the questions? I always say I write because I have questions, not because I have the answers. And what were the questions you had in creating her character?
Wow, I love that question too. So first of all, I'll say thank you so much. It's wonderful to hear that character comes across as kind of rich and complex. Absolutely. I think the questions that motivated me in crafting that character, and I pronounce her name Nailah, but
Nailah, okay.
I think, I'm not sure which one is sort of most correct from the Swahili, but, I really was sort of thinking through I've lived an experience of being a Black queer girl growing up in a very large body. I've not lived an experience of mothering such a character, right? Mothering such a figure. And so I was thinking through sort of how Nailah is able to act on her love and care for her daughter, and how that, she has to kind of reconcile that with her desire to protect her daughter, not only in a kind of physical way in terms of protecting her from what she perceives as the dangers of her body, but also the social dangers of not fitting in, right? And of course, this is something that Nailah inherits from her own mother, Ma Mer, and one of the journeys Malaya is on over the course of the novel is starting to really trace that lineage of women in her family and seeing how her body is just sort of one iteration and one manifestation of a set of lifetimes of grappling with like how to be a woman, right? And what happens when we fail to do womanhood correctly. And so for me, Nailah, she's sort of in the middle. There are 3 generations of women, and she's literally and figuratively in the middle of this struggle, trying to deal with her inherited ideas about what womanhood is and what a woman's body should look like, and trying to protect her daughter from the dangers of the body and the dangers of the world around her.
That's such a good point. I just want to say, I think we have microphones at the back of the room. If anyone has questions that they want to ask, we are going to open it up to Q&A. But I love that you say failed womanhood. I think I did. I think I got an F in womanhood.
Oh, me too.
I I never thought of it like that because I just, I remember being in 7th grade and my friends telling me I walked too straight and trying to show me how to walk so that my hips swayed.
Wow.
And I just looked like I had broken knees. Like I'm like, I can't do it. This is the walk.
And the other side of that is girls who are told that they sway their hips too much, right? And like that's a problem too. I mean, I think we probably all fail womanhood. It's a rigged game, right? It's a setup in a way. And for real, and I feel like this is one of the things that, Malaya sort of has to come to understand that she didn't write the rules. She never signed up to play the game. This is something that's imposed on her, and I think it's imposed on many of us.
Yeah, and she's such a character that you're rooting for throughout the book. From the first page, you're like, I got you, sister. She's just such a wonderfully rendered character, which is so interesting for me in thinking about all that you've accomplished. I mean, you've published so much. You have so many degrees, and has the academic side ever gotten in the way of the creative side? Because I find it's a struggle for me to be in both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't say that the academic side has gotten in the way in any sense other than a kind of pragmatic, logistical sense of like, there were many, many years where I had to focus on first coursework, then exams, and then the dissertation. But the whole time I was thinking about the novel. And in fact, the reason why I ended up publishing a collection of short stories before the novel is because that was something I felt like I could do in the 2 weeks between, the fall semester and the spring semester, or short stories felt more finite and therefore kind of more manageable while I was doing this other thing. But I don't think, in fact, I know I wouldn't have even thought of a PhD in English if I hadn't come to that question as a writer. Like my academic book, which was a kind of revision of my dissertation, it's about exactly what we're talking about. It's about Shange and Morrison and Lord and how they use their words to create effects in the world. Wow. And so there was a deep personal connection for me, and I think that's what allowed me to sustain, the process of finishing the PhD, and also, for me, in some ways more importantly, to sustain my writing practice and my connection to our literatures and why they're meaningful to me while I was doing that other work.
Wow. Now you make me want to go back and read. I think there's someone in the back who has a question.
Anyone has questions? Come on up. Not yet.
Say it again.
Not any questions just yet. You guys can continue.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I could have sworn there was a question back there. So you totally want to make me go back and read them. I was thinking about your dissertation. Is it as a published book? Is it a book that someone who doesn't have a lot of college behind them can read and understand, and how so?
Yeah, that's a great question. To me, the answer is kind of complicated. I think yes. I hope that folks find interest in the topic. It's called The Poetics of Difference, Queer Feminist Forms in the African Diaspora. And I hope that it's something that folks find interest in the topic. It's the kind of book that has to do a kind of performative work in a certain way, right? It was a dissertation, and one of the things that dissertations do is demonstrate that you've read a bunch of stuff and that you can add something meaningful to an academic conversation. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that in a way that satisfied those requirements and also kept me in conversation with the people I most want to be in conversation with, which is, the people in this room, the people, again, I'm born and raised in Harlem. Yeah. This is a community of accountability for me. But what helped me to kind of work through that was to remember that all of the writers that I'm naming, and including yourself, right, who I'm sitting here beside and happy to be in conversation with, we all write in multiple genres, right? We all write in multiple genres for multiple audiences. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a reason for that. I think it comes from that sense of, wanting to constantly expand the realms in which we fit in, right? That I guess for a writer like you, I'm thinking about writing fiction and memoir and writing for a range of ages, right? There's a reason why we want to speak to as many people as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. So for me, the academic book is speaking to, is sort of directed to one audience, but my hope is it's an open field for lots of audiences, folks who are interested in Black, queer, women, girls, and folks interested in our lives and how we write and the power behind our words.
Oh, they're so powerful. I just want to take a moment to thank our sign language interpreters. We really appreciate you being here. So now you're at, can I tell where you're teaching?
Yes, yeah.
At George Washington, right?
Georgetown.
Georgetown.
The other George
Yeah,
in
the-
DC, yeah.
Teaching, and what is that experience like? Are you teaching writing? What are you finding that's interesting about the young writers you're teaching? And what has that transition from, Harlem to DC been like?
So I've really enjoyed teaching at Georgetown. I just got there in January, so I've taught for exactly one semester. And as we all know, this past couple of years they haven't been quite typical of any space or any job, right? So sort of, we were on lockdown, we were online the first couple of weeks that I was teaching. So, but I've really enjoyed the students there. I haven't taught a creative writing course yet, but I will be teaching creative writing in the spring of 2023. So I look forward to that. I will say I find a lot of inspiration in my students. There are a couple of my students, former students, kind of milling about here, in fact. I find a lot of inspiration in my students. I find that, the students who gravitate toward my classes, and again, these are classes in Black feminist literature, Black queer literatures, African diaspora literary cultures. I teach a lot of hip hop. These are folks who want to articulate social and political critiques that they already have, but they may not have the language for, right? And so, like, as a language head, as a language person, it's very exciting for me to be able to have conversations where we brainstorm and we come up with the words to describe what it is to be non-binary and from the South and a graphic artist, or what it means to feel like a complex web of belonging and not belonging. And it's great because I get to introduce them to the books that helped me navigate all of that myself, and to do so as a creative writer. So I enjoy teaching, I love teaching. I didn't actually make a transition directly from Harlem to DC because I was teaching in Philly for quite a while, and then was teaching at Duke in North Carolina for a while, taught at the University of Massachusetts for a while. So I've been sort of, moving about. But it's also been pretty cool to have these same kinds of conversations at all these different kinds of schools, and meet students from, all over the world, really, to talk about these literatures that mean so much to me.
I want to take your hip hop class.
Come through. That would be dope. Come through. It's fun.
There is a question back there, and it's Linda Villarosa.
Hello.
Under the Skin, new book.
Yes.
Can you describe the process of getting your book published, especially because it has a Black queer theme?
Thank you so much. And I just want to echo, Under the Skin, an incredible book, Linda Villarosa's book. I think it's sold out here, which is a great sign for the book. Not the greatest for those of us who are hoping to buy it today. But, thank you so much for that question. In some ways, it was a long, in terms of time, it was a long road, but that was largely because I took a long time to revise it. So the earliest version of this book was actually my master's thesis in 2006, many, many, many moons ago. And it was at that point that I thought, okay, well, I know I want to spend a little time revising this before I try and seek an agent and before I send it out. I know what I'll do. I'll just go get a PhD real quick, right? And it's like, whatever, I'm reading books, so that's great, and that's going to help me as a writer, which turned out to be true. And I have the summers, so obviously I'll just be able to finish my novel and send it out. I'll be, whatever, I'll have blown up by 2006. Turns out that is not how PhD programs work. And so the path to publication of this novel was elongated for me largely because of the PhD. So to your earlier question of sort of, was there a tension between those two aspects of my writing life? That was where the kind of time tension came in. And I was able to secure an agent, and we kind of worked on it a little bit. Janet Silver of Avitas Creative, we worked on it together for a few years. And then it was really just 2021 or maybe 2020, these past couple of years. Janet sent it to Gina Iaquinta, who is right there, who's an incredible editor at Live Right. Yes, we have to give it up for Gina. And it truly has been one of the best, most sort of fulfilling and illuminating editorial experiences of my writing life, to work with somebody whose life experience is different from my own and different from the characters, but who gets it, right? And who sort of helps me kind of get the range and reach of the story in a different way. So I feel very grateful for that. But I'm glad you asked, because it also, to me, it never occurred to me to put the novel down or stop working on it. But I do think for those of us in the room who have manuscripts that we're working on, this has been a long journey with this book, but it's been a beautiful journey. And I never truly seriously thought of putting it down, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because it found its right home and it found the right moment. And it just has been a really, truly, like a really gratifying experience for me that I couldn't have really dreamed of.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Linda. And thanks for opening it up to those kind of questions. Nothing y'all can ask is wrong.
Yeah.
We have another 3 minutes, sadly. So
We have another 5 more minutes. So
Oh, we have
anybody
5 more minutes?
questions, I'll come to you. If you don't want to get up, let me
Thank
know.
you. Does anyone have a question?
I know you do.
Here's one down here.
I know sometimes people don't want to get out their seats.
Yes.
Okay.
How did you know? Yeah, exactly. I have a question. I know with Toni Morrison, she talks about her characters and how the characters come to her, and also there's chapters in life. How do you write? Are you writing in terms of the moment, or do you see the characters living in the person who's reading in their chapters in their lives?
That's such a beautiful question. Thank you for that. Morrison, I mean, that's absolutely my experience of Morrison, right? Reading The Bluest Eye at 11, have a very different experience from when I, read it later in life. I teach it to undergrads now, teaching it to 18 to 22-year-olds and sort of watching how the text unfolds and, kind of flourishes differently for them according to where they are in their life. Yeah, for me, I'm hoping that my novel does the same. I really, it's a coming of age story. Malaya is 8 years old when we meet her. She's a teenager when we leave her. My hope is that folks will be able, at almost any stage, to find something to connect to in her story, but also find something to learn from. I know that I did, right? I mean, when I was 24, I think, when I started really sort of telling her story in earnest, and significantly more mature and wizened by the time I finished it, right? And my sort of learning from the story, and again with the relationship with my editor, learning from the story and learning sort of what the story truly was at different stages in my life, I think that my hope is that it's benefited and enriched the story. I think the best literatures are the ones that we can come back to at different stages in our life and learn something new from, but also be reminded of what we knew all along. Thank you.
Someone want to ask a question?
Hi. Mecca, Malaya is such an engaging character. She's a person that it's like she's a new member of the community now. We all know her. We look forward to hearing more about her. What would you like young girls who read your book, who read about and learn about Malaya, what do you want them to take away from this story? All girls, big girls, girls of color, girls in general. What do you want them to get from your story?
So I'll answer the question and then I'll have another add-on comment to make. So the main sort of takeaway that I'm hoping readers, sort of receive in their reading of this book, and as you said, girls, women of all ages, queer folks of all ages, I really hope that folks feel empowered to define themselves and to think, sort of carefully about what messages they want to receive. You mentioned being a member of the community, right? I think our love for our community sometimes requires pushback on some of the internalized and inherited messages that we get. And my hope is that folks who are, different or sort of outsiders in whatever way, that they come away from the book with a sense of sort of being empowered to create their own definitions of themselves. Audre Lorde says that one must define oneself for oneself, right? I hope to be telling a story of a character who's able to do that and who does that in a way that opens up space for others to do the same. The other point that I want to make is thank you for that question, Mom. And you know, it's been wonderful. I sent my parents a copy of The Galley, and it's just such a gift to have parents who support your work, you know, sort of at various stages of your career and in various ways. So thank you for that, and thank you for the question.
I think we have time for one more question.
Any other questions? Anyone here? Well, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
As we wrap up, I want to know what's next for both of you guys. Jacqueline, we just talked about hair, but what's what's next for the both of you on this journey of, speaking to Black girls and Black women?
I think I'm working on it. The next thing that I'm going into production for Red at the Bone, the movie, which I finished the screenplay of. I'm working on a screenplay now about a very famous journalist in our time, not in our time, but a very famous journalist, and I can't talk about it yet. But she told the truth freely, let's say, and I don't know. And I'm building Baldwin for the Arts, which is a residency for creatives of the global majority. So you can find that online. Linda Villarosa is on the board, but it's a place where artists, visual artists, writers, composers can come to and create work for free, for no charge.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's work.
I'm sure. So currently I'm working on some nonfiction, actually, some kind of creative nonfiction. Maliah's story is very much about being a big woman in the world, and movement is a major theme. And movement has been a major theme in my life, particularly both travel and exercise, and my relationship to exercise and fitness spaces. I was telling Jackie, I've been doing Muay Thai lately, and I run, and this is a part of my life that's always been deeply connected to my writing, but I've never written about it. And I find myself, sort of thinking through some of those experiences. I also have a creative project. It's kind of a hybrid creative and theoretical project that I'm working on that I can't quite talk about. But Baldwin for the Arts sounds like a great place to work on it.
Come through.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, Mecca. Congratulations.
Thank you.